Our next speaker is Maggie Allen. She's a Knauss Fellow in the NOAA Office of Education. Maggie received her bachelor's degree in environmental studies and sociology from Whitman College in Washington State, and then received her master's degree in marine affairs from the University of Washington, where her thesis focused on advocacy coalition between an indigenous community and environmental groups to help development of a coal terminal. Maggie has also worked as a social scientist for the Northwest Fisheries Science Center, an internship coordinator at the South Slope National Estuarine Research Reserve, and an environmental educator in the Florida Keys. She's passionate about community-based conservation and environmental education, which seems pretty obvious. A fun fact about Maggie is that starting when she was 18 and then finishing when she was 24, she wrote a young adult trilogy about a naive girl who travels to Africa and gets caught up in a supernatural world. And Maggie's title is Public Perception of Aquaculture and the Role of Aquariums.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm losing my voice, so I hope I don't sound too terrible today. Thanks for joining. Like Christopher said, I'm going to talk about how aquariums can improve public perception of aquaculture, and that's through a network that NOAA Education coordinates called the Coastal Ecosystems Learning Centers Network, which the group of us you can see in this picture, where we had our recent annual workshop at the Shed Aquarium in Chicago. So what is the Coastal Ecosystem Learning Centers? We call it CELC for short. It's a consortium of 25 aquariums and marine science education centers across North America. There's one in Canada, the Vancouver Aquarium, and one in Mexico, the Veracruz Aquarium. And the network works together to engage the public in protecting coastal and marine ecosystems. And like I said, our Office of Education coordinates the network, and by doing so, we're able to reach over 20 million visitors a year across the continent, while providing leadership and resources to its members as well. So it's a win-win. The CELC goal is, like I said, it's to function in a unified manner to engage the public and protect coastal and marine ecosystems. We have 4 points of our strategic plan. 1 is to improve ocean and climate literacy amongst the audiences. 2 is to increase participation in coastal and ocean conservation and stewardship activities. Then 3 is to foster the aquarium's audience's relationships with the environment of the ocean, of the coast, and also to increase community resilience. And then 4 is to establish a community of practice that emphasizes cross-institution communication, coordination, and professionalism. So what does this have to do with aquaculture? Well, as many of you know, aquaculture is a priority for NOAA, and it's also really important to certain CELC members. They view aquaculture as a priority as well. And so the CELC network can help NOAA by engaging millions of aquarium visitors on the latest advancements in aquaculture and its multiple benefits. And so the objective of this aquaculture initiative is to increase the public's understanding of aquaculture about these benefits, so that aquaculture can serve as a domestically produced, safe, and sustainable seafood if done right. Also, it can help conserve and restore coastal and marine ecosystems, like with coral restoration or shellfish. And it can also improve the local economies as well. And so with CELC, we would develop a common set of unified messages, as well as a specialized set that's based on the region and interest of the aquarium. And we also develop a national campaign strategy that's focused on a social media campaign, as well as an on-site messaging campaign, and have local or regional stories where people could tell their stories about aquaculture in that area. However, we are aware that aquaculture is not super popular in North America, so we did a literature review to understand the public perception of this emerging trend. And so this is mostly a secondary study. We didn't conduct any primary research, so I'm just going to talk about what we found in the literature review. So about half of the U.S. has a negative view of farm-raised seafood, so not aquaculture as a whole, but farm-raised seafood in particular. And this is due to concerns with product quality, food safety, and the environment. And the factors for this negativity can include a variety of things, like when people hold that water body where they want to recreate in it and use it for fun, and they may view negatively aquaculture being in their way. And that kind of ties to another reason that there's conflicts of this finite coastal space. So for other uses of the marine environment, like renewable energy or commercial fishing. And then people are also concerned about aquaculture because of local unrelated environmental disasters like oil spills. So even if it has really nothing to do with aquaculture, if a recent oil spill occurred in that area, they may just feel negative about any sort of new development. And then if there wasn't enough consultation of stakeholders and not enough transparency in that. And then income level also is a reason. A study found that wealthy areas are more likely to place greater weight and importance on aquaculture's impacts on the environment, where low-income areas are more likely to place greater weight on the economic impacts. And then also acceptance of aquaculture activities are greater where socioeconomic benefits are high, and there was lower incidence of concerns about environmental pollution from the incident. So if there's they see it helping the economy a lot, they're more likely to not mind as much about environmental impacts. But because aquariums are so community-based and rooted in their local areas, it was really important to understand how different regions see aquaculture. So then we looked deeper into it and tried to find out what different regions think, because it's so different. And we also encourage our CELC members to pick which elements, practices, and species they want to highlight further. So it's a completely voluntary effort. If one aquarium wants to focus on coral reef aquaculture, they can do so. Or if they want to focus on food security, the issue of food security, so sustainable seafood, they can do that as well. So it's really up to them and what their region is most concerned with. Thanks to Cindy for this image of a good bumper sticker that I don't know where you found, but I cited you. So. And then so we focused on the Pacific Northwest first, because that's a very, there was a good amount of literature on the Pacific Northwest, which has mollusks, salmon, sablefish, and seaweed for aquaculture. And for salmon, the Pacific Northwest is generally okay with shellfish and seaweed. However, in this region, there is a negative perception on finfish aquaculture, even though one study found that consumers aren't necessarily knowledgeable of current and potential finfish aquaculture occurring there. And one of the reasons there is a negative perception of finfish aquaculture in that area is because many residents in the Pacific Northwest consider their coastlines more pristine than other places, and they want to keep it that way, and they feel like aquaculture may damage that reputation. And they generally view wild products as superior. And many of you may know about the recent escape that happened in the Puget Sound, where a big Atlantic salmon escaped into the waters. And so that would probably not help the reputation of finfish aquaculture either. So it'd be interesting to see literature that comes out after that. And we have 3 aquariums in the Northwest, and they're all in very different areas. We have the Vancouver Aquarium in Canada. However, it is connected to Seattle Aquarium by the same sea, the Salish Sea, and then the Oregon Coast Aquarium is further south on the open coast. So it would be very different to how those people that visit those aquariums feel about aquaculture. And then in New England, I also found a variety of different literature, and none of it was super generalizable to all of New England. Dalton et al. Looked at Rhode Island, and the people there weren't really representative of the population because the median age was 60, and 85% had attended college. And these residents didn't really strictly oppose or support aquaculture development, but it found that support really depends on where it's occurring, how big the operation is, and how it's being done. And they found that residents that could see the water from their house were less likely to support aquaculture, and they also trusted the permitting agencies less, and they also felt more strongly about aquaculture than people who couldn't see the water from their house. And they also found that shellfish aquaculture farmers were the only group who thought all levels of aquaculture were acceptable, and wild harvest fishermen thought that even low levels of development were accessible. And then there was another study that looked at northern New England's inshore commercial fishermen, and they found that 1/3 of the fishermen were willing to consider moving into open aquaculture as an income. And those willing to consider aquaculture, they had less commercial fishing experience than those who weren't likely to accept it. They participated in more fisheries. They were more knowledgeable about aquaculture, and they were less concerned about the negative economic impact. And they also saw marine aquaculture as a prestigious endeavor. And then another study looked at a seafood festival in New Hampshire. So again, not very representative of the general population. Because 80% of those respondents viewed aquaculture as a good idea. But the one thing that can be used to generalize is that they found that respondents more familiar with marine aquaculture tended to have more positive views about it. And again, we have 3 aquariums in New England, the New England Aquarium in Boston, the Mystic Aquarium in Connecticut, and the New York Aquarium in the city. So again, 3 very different areas. We have 2 highly dense urban areas and then a rural area in Connecticut. So it would be, again, important to conduct some primary research to find out what those residents thought, because they're also different. And I was surprised to find not a lot of literature about Alaskan perception of aquaculture, because there is such a contentious issue up there, and there is a variety of aquaculture being done, like seaweed, shellfish, king crab enhancement, and salmon hatcheries. However, there was a study that looked at all of the U.S. For public perception of general marine uses, and they focused on aquaculture as one of the components. And they looked at Southeast Alaska, which is coincidentally where our aquarium is at the Sea Life Center in Seward. And that area was liked aquaculture the least out of all the other areas that they studied. And those residents viewed aquaculture as a threat to their wild salmon fisheries because they thought it could damage their ecosystems and their economies. And the Gulf was another one I was surprised not to find a lot of literature on, because there is such potential for growth there at aquaculture, and it's an area where a lot of people are looking to develop aquaculture, and there are already oysters and offshore fish farms in the Gulf. And the same study that looked at Alaska also looked at Florida's Gulf Coast, and that was where they found a very low concern about aquaculture, and they thought that was because the industry is strong in that area. But this would be something that we really want to look more into, especially because we have a lot of aquariums in that area, in very different with very different demographics. The Florida Aquarium in Tampa, the Audubon Aquarium in New Orleans, Rookery Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve in Southwest Florida, Dauphin Island Sea Lab in Alabama, and the Veracruz Aquarium in Mexico, and I forgot to put on there also Texas Aquarium as well. And so the literature had some overall recommendations on how to improve public perception. It's important to collaborate with transparency and openness with stakeholders, including environmental nonprofits, professionals, government agencies, and the industry, and they recommended doing things like hosting a forum. And also making sure some of those stakeholders are people that are less heard in aquaculture conversations, and you should acknowledge that there are potential impacts for them. So like low-income populations, it is important to involve them and acknowledge that there might be some impacts. And like we're trying to do, conduct a communications education campaign was recommended. And they recommend focusing on things like talking about the health benefits of eating aquaculture, addressing food security issues, and how it has a low environmental cost compared to other food sources, especially the protein sources. And the aquariums could also schedule fish farm visits and public talks by working with aquaculture industries. And also making sure that people understand aquaculture's social dimensions, which could be incorporated even into curriculum, because they show that if people know more about socioeconomic benefits of aquaculture, that could counterbalance the concerns people have over the environment. And most important, which was stated time and time again in very, very many different academic articles, was that it's very important to acknowledge place and to understand that attitudes vastly differ by location. So you must tailor programs to different groups and communities, different aquaculture regions and industry sections. And every dialogue or education initiative must be grounded in regional and local questions, concerns, wants, needs, and the topic should be tailored to species and impacts that are most relevant to those people as well. So it's very important to make sure you know your audience. So for us, our next steps would be for this literature review to fill those gaps that I mentioned, such as the Southeast. There's nothing, I couldn't find anything on the Atlantic side of below New England, so our North Carolina Aquarium, South Carolina, as well as the Mid-Atlantic, the National Aquarium. There was nothing in that area I could find. The Great Lakes, just because it's a NOAA, important place for NOAA, and we have the Shed Aquarium there that we're eyeing off as a potential partner. And Hawaii, that's another big one with aquaculture, but I couldn't find any literature on Hawaii, as well as California. Aquarium of the Pacific is a big aquaculture component, and they're doing a lot of research, but I couldn't find any literature myself about Southern California or Northern California on aquaculture. And so by doing this, I'm going to be coordinating with the regional aquaculture contacts within Sea Grant and NOAA. I actually have a call later this afternoon with some people, and hopefully that will help fill some gaps where maybe they have done some research. And it would be really ideal to conduct a primary social study where I could do an analysis and then report about the concerns that are in each region and make it more specific to those aquariums. As a social scientist, that would be really awesome if I could do that. However, that requires a lot of funds and probably like multiple PhD students. So I don't know how feasible that would be. Ideal world was where we could get really good answers about how people feel, so we could cater these educational messages to these audiences. And for the initiative itself, we hope to finalize recruitment of the interested aquariums, which I said are voluntary, so we're only going to involve people who are interested, and we're doing that right now. And we're going to hold a teleconference with those interested aquariums very soon, where we can kick off the campaign. And then we're hoping to coordinate with the Aquarium of the Pacific. They're doing a landscape analysis where they're assessing where participating institutions are on aquaculture, and that survey is under development. And once we get that going, we're going to establish connections between the institutions and appropriate NOAA staff and resources that are in their areas, as well as develop a collaborative space that allows access to the latest science-based information on aquaculture. And finally, we hope to host professional development opportunities for aquarium staff, similar to there's a program that teaches docents on aquarium floors to communicate climate change. So I hope to be some sort of like that model where they can feel comfortable about answering guest questions about aquaculture. So that's it. This was a very in the work progress, very different than talking about a completed thesis. So I would really like to be able to answer some questions, or if anyone's interested or has some good resources or ideas, please talk to us. Christos is the Deputy Director at Education, and he's worked hard on this as well, and a lot of this is his doing, so please reach out to us if you have questions. Cindy is also a communications manager for NOAA Aquaculture, and she's worked with us as well, so please feel free to reach out to any of us if you have ideas or want to help out. And also, I wouldn't be here if all these literature review I did. Thank you for all these people I haven't met for doing their work as well. So they've been great. All right, thank you.
Plenty of time for questions.
Yeah, Adrian.
You talked about, was all the research centered around perception of aquaculture for coastal areas? Because I know
inland, yeah.
just one thing came to mind. That was in Gallenberg a couple months ago, and they had an aquarium there.
Oh yeah.
And on the side it said every best aquarium is very skeptical of that statement.
Which aquarium was that?
In Gallenberg, Tennessee.
I don't know what that is. Okay. Okay. I mean, I tried to stick with areas where we had aquariums that we are partnered with, because we have only those 25. So, I mean, I did look for Great Lakes, and there is one that we have in Iowa that's near the Great Lakes and also in the Mississippi watershed, so that would be related. But I really just tried to stick to where we had aquariums, where we could send our messaging, and where NOAA works as well. So, but I looked pretty general as well, just general aquaculture perception. So there was a lot of international research I found. So, yeah, Amber.
I'm a little ignorant about aquaculture, but I think one thing that I was thinking about was, you mentioned that folks thought about environmental impacts, pollution, and things that really work for social aquaculture. But I was thinking about nutrient pollution. There's a lot of concern about that. Do people have any perception of that associated with aquaculture, or do you find
I'm sure people do, yeah. I mean, I've noticed that, like, in news articles, especially with that salmon escape in the Puget Sound, there was a lot of concern about nutrient pollution and things like that. So, but I think generally, Cindy, maybe you can, people don't really know, like, that they have generalized environmental concerns about aquaculture, but they're usually unable, like, the general public's not is able to really specifically talk about what they're concerned about. Yeah.
Do people tend to conflate the idea about genetically modified organisms with aquaculture organisms, which is not the same thing, but
Yeah.
that way?
I mean, I didn't find that in my the literature I looked at, but I mean, I've heard that, like, secondhand. So, yeah, yeah, yeah. Cindy, you can answer that.
Yeah, that's been a perception issue for us. Although more recently, we're finding and talking to folks and talking to people with secret encounters, or people who are concerned about radiation from the farm fish that happen to drive up to modified. So it's sort of disparities what's happening in the
Are there any discussions around analyzing behavior change at all, or is it primarily just public perception?
I think we're trying to just increase awareness first, because there is a lack of awareness, but eventually it would be great to do behavior change, and I think that's an ideal goal. But I think right now we're just trying to get the aquariums on board to like just tailor their messaging about aquaculture and then look at behavior change down the line. But again, Cindy, if you have anything about behavior change that you guys are working on.
We've been doing some work with sort of my counterparts in the EU, and they're just so much further ahead of us than we are in aquaculture. They have meetings about aquaculture, and people ask them, are we going to get to a point where we have too much aquaculture going on in our country? Is there too much aquaculture in a specific area? Or when we have our talks, people still want to know what a fish farm looks like.
Yeah.
So we're not even there yet. We're
Yeah.
really concerned about that. They're still just trying to wrap their mind around what farming the ocean looks like.
Mm-hmm.
You could briefly recap for those on the
Yeah.
phone because they can't hear.
Oh, what Cindy said? Yeah, so for those on the phone, we said that for behavior change in the U.S., we're not quite there yet. We're still really just focusing on awareness and showing people what fish farms are and where they are in their community. Whereas in Europe, that they are kind of more focused on that because it is so strong there and almost to the point of being too many, or the people are concerned about that there's too much aquaculture there. So the U.S. right now, we're not quite there yet. Yeah, Josh.
How many of these CELC partner institutions do you have the opportunity to visit? And did you notice any differences in how the aquaculture message is being exhibited? Do some of the aquariums, for example, have a whole exhibit or just a message on their website?
Right now, there's pretty much no aquaculture messaging. That's like what we're trying to do is to get them in the aquariums. To answer your first question, I mean, I've tried to visit them when I'm like in that area. But so I visited a couple that I've been there for, and yeah, like there's not really much messaging. The Aquarium of the Pacific is the one that's kind of leading the aquaculture charge, and I haven't been there in a while, but I think I might go there in a couple of weeks. So I don't know if they have, the city again probably knows if they have messaging in there because I know they have a very strong website presence of aquaculture. The aquaculture that probably does exist in aquariums right now is again focused on like exhibits and using aquaculture for coral reefs and fish, so you don't have to take them out of the ocean. You can ornamental fish and things like that, but probably not so much in terms of food security or fit fish aquaculture, things like that.
You said that.
Oh, go ahead.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
You said that you didn't see any of these kind of studies for the Southeast and California, right?
I couldn't find them. Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on why that might be?
I don't know. I mean, that's a good question. I was surprised, especially about California, because there's so much research there. I did find one that was like kind of about it, but not about really what I was looking for in public perception. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of aquaculture research there, just not about this public perception issue. So that's something that I'm hoping to answer if I get to talk to like Sea Grant contacts or something, people that work out there. Maybe they know something I don't. But everything I found, and people sent me a lot of different literature too, and I couldn't find anything. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Good question.
Yeah. I'll be interested to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. In the back. Yeah.
So I guess from your work, it sounds like there's a lot of emphasis that needs to be done on describing different types of aquaculture. Do you think that there may be some methodology of renaming the varieties of aquaculture to break this awkward public perceptions that are happening? Something that would be redefining?
Yeah.
Think of that idea.
And I think we've talked about that too a little bit, how it is basically farming. Yes. Okay, so the question was, can we kind of rename aquaculture about the different practices of it to kind of help with improve the public perception? And I think that is something that maybe aquaculture is working on, or definitely think about in terms of that aquaculture is basically farming, and that we've been farming the land for centuries, and that if we just term it something maybe a little that sounds more like we're just doing that on the ocean, maybe people are more accepting of it. If we term fish farming, and then if for shellfish, especially if you put shellfish and had shellfish farming is more acceptable, especially in the Puget Sound where I moved from, they're really excited about shellfish farming, but when you mention fish farming, they're really anti that. So if you just blanketed aquaculture, they may be more negative towards everything. Same goes with like restoration of coral reefs, if looking into rephrasing that as well. So, and I think some people do that. And Cindy, sorry I keep picking on you, but you guys probably work on that too. So she gets picked on. So.
Do we have any?
I have a question from the webinar. Are you connecting at all with Monterey Bay Seafood Watch and similar organizations on aquaculture awareness?
Yeah, and that is something we're trying to do. I mean, Monterey Bay is one of our aquariums, and I know we've been trying to reach out to them. So that is kind of in the works at the moment. Again, Aquarium of the Pacific, they have a similar program called Seafood for the Future, and our contact there is really involved with us. So that's our main seafood sustainability program we're working on, but we're really hoping to get in touch with Monterey Bay. But because we don't work directly monthly with the seafood sustainability people over there, we work with the education directors. It's taking a bit longer. So, but hopefully. Yeah.
Any more questions on that?
Yeah.
We have time for probably one more question.
Well, yeah.
I have a question about any data you or your aquariums have about who their visitors are and where they're coming from, and how you plan to adjust your regional studies based on your aquarium location to their visitor population.
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, I don't know. That would be up to the individual aquarium, and I think they all track them differently. So that would be something to definitely talk with them with, because yeah, we don't have that data at the moment. So that'd be good. So
we're currently out of time. If you have any more questions for either of the speakers, you can catch them immediately following this. I just want to thank everyone for attending in person, also online. Thank you again to both of the speakers. They were great talks. Also, thank you, Judith, for taking the reins on all of the behind the scenes and making sure everything happened. And that's all we have. So, reminder, if you haven't signed in, please sign into the log at the front there, and enjoy the rest of your day.